A new poll out shows that Democrats here in the United States overwhelmingly support soy boy Trudeau's brutal crackdown of the Freedom Convoy. In this video, we're going to take a look at the latest on Trudeau's continuation of the anti-democratic emergency powers to persecute his political opponents. We're going to see how more and more Canadians are pushing back against that. And stick to the very end of this video when I'll reveal precisely why leftist liberalism is cracking down on so much dissent. You are not going to want to miss this. Greetings, everyone. Dr. Steve here with you. Great to be with you as always. I am your daily fake news antidote. As each and every day, I provide patriotic analysis to help you to think better so you can feel better in these crazy and turbulent times. So if you haven't already done so, you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. And gang, as you know, we have declared here on this channel the month of February to be Rhino Hunting Month. We're determined to get rid of every single Republican in name only that claim to be patriots, but who always betray us by voting for the status quo. Well, it's time to suit up for the hunt. In addition to our ReporterRhino.com website, our amazing patriotic designers made special Turley Talks t-shirts just for Rhino Hunting Month for you to show your support. They are so utterly awesome. So make sure to click on that link below or go to store.turleytalks.com. That's store.turleytalks.com for all the Patriot gear you need for Rhino Hunting Month. You're going to love it, and you're going to be supporting this channel as well. So click on that link below, and happy shopping. We so appreciate it. All right, gang, let's dive right in here. As I'm sure you've heard, Canada's Parliament has officially voted in favor of extending the emergency powers that were invoked by the woke joke Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to crack down on the trucker convoy in Ottawa. With the help from the NDP, the New Democratic Party, which in many respects is the woke far-left party of Canada, Trudeau's Liberals carried the measure 185 votes in favor of the emergency powers with 151 votes against. Jordan Peterson, who of course himself is Canadian, has not been timid with his responses. He retweeted woke joke Justin's latest call for all Canadians to work together to bring healing to our nation, and Peter responded with F you and your sanctimony. Seriously. When are libs just going to figure out how cringeworthy they look whenever they virtue signal? It's amazing how blind they are to that. Peterson also went on to tweet out, quote, stunning to see Canadians celebrating their loss of freedom in the face of an illusory threat. And then he hyperlinked to the hashtag Trudeau was right and comments, if you want to know how people lose what is most valuable, this is extremely instructive. Now, as far as this side of the border is concerned, I knew you already knew this, but the latest Trafalgar poll has clearly confirmed that the majority of American Democrats actually support Trudeau's brutal crackdown of the Freedom Convoy, while the clear majority of Americans opposed it. 55% of all voters disapproved of Trudeau's tactics here in the States. Nevertheless, an astonishing 65% of Democrats support it. 65%. So Democrats are now officially the party of non-democratic emergency powers and brutal crackdowns. The poll also found that the majority of voters aged 65 and older were favorable to Trudeau, interestingly enough, as well as the majority of blacks and Latinos. Every other demographic, men, women, Asian, white, younger groups, they all opposed Trudeau's handling of the protesters. And this is rather ironic given the fact that the new narrative that's being used to justify the continuation of the non-democratic emergency powers is that this was all a foreign invasion of MAGA forces from the United States. That is the narrative that's taking hold among these leftist thugs. There's nothing to do with freedom or vax mandates. It's got everything to do with far-right neo-Nazi white nationalists trying to take over the Canadian government. Insurrection! These are insurrectionists! Now, keep in mind, these are the very same people who originally blamed Russia for the Freedom Convoy. I mean, needless to say, these totalitarian developments in Canada, they are very concerning. The Toronto Sun published a piece concerned about, quote, Canada's increasingly autocratic government. And the piece is so good because it fully recognizes that the Trudeau regime is justifying its crushing of democracy by claiming that democracy is under attack, by portraying the Freedom Convoy as a bunch of neo-Confederate white supremacist racists. Trudeau and his surrogates in the Canadian media are presenting themselves as the defenders of democracy, all the while they openly trample on democratic norms. And what's so interesting here is that this was also predictable. In fact, critics of neoliberalism have been calling out the tyrannical impulses inherent in neoliberalism for some time now. I think a very good example, recent example of this comes from the journalist Glenn Greenwald, entitled The Neoliberal War and Dissent. And note the byline: those who most flamboyantly proclaim that they are fighting fascists continue to embrace and wield the defining weapons of despotism. That's some beautiful writing there. Obviously, Greenwald is exploring in this piece why leftist liberals, what he calls neoliberals, why they're so prone to repressive tactics. And it's interesting because, as Greenwald notes, this notion of being democratic or democratically elected has this bizarre veneer of seemingly protecting our politicians from being called out as repressive autocrats in a manner comparable to the way neoliberals talk about, say, Vladimir Putin, for example. So he compares side by side two synonymous headlines. On one side, from Reuters, Russia freezes bank account of an anti-government political protester. On the other side, the headline, Trudeau freezes bank account of anti-government protesters. And what Greenwald notes is that because of the veneer of so-called democracy in Canada, we're supposed to look at these headlines in a fundamentally different way. We're supposed to denounce the one and applaud the other, even although they're exactly the same thing. They're the cancellation of political opposition. But of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg of what we've been seeing. He traces out how Western governments have treated Julian Assange, how Spain cracked down on Catalan secessionists, the January 6th protesters. All this signals just how intolerant Western neoliberal regimes have grown towards legitimate political dissent. And this intolerance has been amplified by the censorship programs of big tech in Silicon Valley and the increasing wokeification of corporate America. You know how things have become woke, right? When you suddenly see mass trails of censorship. Isn't that interesting? You know an institution has become woke when you suddenly realize that that institution no longer allows for dissent. And one of the reasons for that, what critics of neoliberalism have long pointed out now for decades, is that neoliberalism operates according to what is called totalizing categories. So, for example, neoliberals never talk about constitutional rights or American rights. They talk only about human rights. Now, you know, human rights is a totalizing category in that there's no basis for dissent, legitimate political dissent, without being anti-human. Or you'll note neoliberals never defend traditional roles of women, such as the right of mothers or the rights of a wife or something like that. They defend women's rights. So how do I dissent from that without being anti-woman, misogynist? And we can keep going and going. I can't dissent from minority rights without being what? Anti-minority right. I can't dissent from LGBT rights without being some kind of phobic. Now you know why they keep adding letters. Neoliberalism is built on totalizing categories from which there is no recognized legitimate dissent. Anyone who dissents from the norms of liberalism is by definition a racist, sexist, and all kinds of phobic. This is all a fancy way of saying that neoliberalism has effectively shut down debate. It pushes what's technically called radical perspectivalism that ironically crushes democratic participation for those who've been deemed to have, quote, unacceptable views, right, as Trudeau called it. This is why democratic regimes can be every bit as repressive and intolerant as any autocracy. This is where the David Frenches of the world are just utterly and completely clueless, in my opinion. They actually think that democracy and public accountability are absolutist safeguards from the immoral abuses of autocratic thugocracies like Russia and Iran. But as we're finding out in our own experience, democratic regimes can be just as exclusionary and absolutist and despotic towards segments of their population that the powers that be have effectively marginalized. They can be just as bad as any autocratic regime. Now, obviously, we'll keep an eye on how things develop in Canada, but make no mistake, what's happening in Canada can indeed happen here. Just ask 65% of Democrats. Now, before you go, you'll definitely want to check out my latest video I just uploaded on how the Durham investigation is about to end the FBI and Hillary Clinton for good. You are not going to want to miss that. So make sure to click on the link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.